Well, I'm very lucky that I've travelled the world quite a bit, sometimes for work and sometimes for pleasure. And I don't deliberately go looking for stories, that's for sure. But I am aware of the fact that when I travel, everything is new and it's fresh and it's different, and therefore hugely interesting. And I'm finding out things all the time that I really never knew before. The country I know best, besides the UK, is France, because it's the only other language I speak properly. So I've travelled a lot in France. And I remember going down to, again, for no good reason other than I wanted, at one point, to climb the mountains of the Pyrenees, which are between France and Spain, as you know, for a stupid reason, a really silly reason, but it's quite an interesting reason. I wanted to stand with one foot in France and one foot in Spain, with the border running between my legs. And you think you're a nutter. I just love that idea because I live on an island and you can't do that. You try standing with one foot in England, one foot in France, you'll get the splits very badly. So I did that. So I was on the top of this mountain in Spain, standing one foot in Spain, one foot in France, and it was really good. And whilst I was there, I discovered something. I discovered that over this border during the Second World War, lots of Jewish people, shot down airmen, French workers escaping, wanted to escape from occupied France, which was occupied by the Nazis at the time, into neutral Spain. And the way to do it was over the mountains. And they used to stay, these people, because they were being sought by the Germans a lot. They used to stay in barns and in houses, which they called safe houses, where the people, very, very, very brave people, looked after them. If they'd been caught, they get shot, just like the prisoners would have been. But these wonderful people looked after them and then escorted them over the mountains. And in the village I was staying in, a place called Lesquin, right, the nearest village, which is why I stayed there, the nearest village to the border, I discovered there were many stories of escapes over that border. And so I thought, well, I'll just write the story of one of them, which is what I did, and I called it Waiting for Anya. And whilst I was there, researching this book, going to the churchyard and finding the names that I needed for the story and walking the hills and just soaking myself in the whole place, because it's a country, you know, I live in the middle of Devon and here I am in mountains and there were shepherdesses and sheep with bells and bears. And the bears brought another story, because I was staying in this pub, this inn, this auberge, and there was a picture up there of a bear shot, lying on chairs outside the front of this hotel, many years before, with hunters standing there with rifles looking really proud. And I discovered that there were very few Pyrenean bears left because they'd all ended this way, because the bears attacked the sheep and the shepherds didn't want them attacking the sheep, so they shot them. And we were driving away from the village, from Lesquin, and came to another village just down the road. And there was this cage there. And in the cage there was a little bear, about half-sized bear. And there was a little story about how it had been found, and apparently there'd been a little girl out messing around, throwing poo sticks or whatever into a river, and had felt something touch, and turned around, there was this little baby bear. So she picked up the bear and she thought, oh, it's my baby bear, and they kept it in the village, and the children had grown up with it. And I wrote a story about that called The Dancing Bear. So out of one place, I got these two stories, completely different, but bears do come into the other one as well, so they kind of mix up a little bit. But I suppose the stories which range across the oceans are the ones that are mostly about travelling the world in the biggest sense, in the most epic sense. And I wrote one called Alone on a Wide, Wide Sea. And this is because I discovered that just after the Second World War, thousands, and I mean thousands of children who were not wanted in this country, they were either orphans or they were parents who couldn't keep their children and they put them in homes. There were far too many kids in homes in this country, not enough homes to keep them in. And so the government decided, and lots of charitable organisations decided, look, we've got to find homes for them in other parts of the world. And that Australia and Canada and places, they were terrific, because there were parents there who had no children of their own and they wanted to adopt these children. So they put these children, I mean thousands of them, on ships in places like Liverpool, and they sailed across the ocean to the other side and were greeted by people they didn't know, told they were going to be living with them. Well, for many of them, don't get me wrong, they had the most fantastic life and it was really good, and they grew up to be Australians and Canadians, and it was a break, it was really good. But for others it was the opposite, because they fell into the hands of terrible people who used them as slaves and Anyway, ghastly things happen. And we only know about these stories now because those kids are my age and they're telling their stories. And I thought I would like to write a story about one of those young kids who went across to Australia, and things happened to him in Australia, and eventually he did find some degree of happiness after terrible beginnings. And he got married and he had a daughter, and then he dies. And his daughter, in order really to find her auntie, her father's sister, who's the only living relative that they had back in England, they had a plan, father and daughter, to build a boat, because he was a boat builder, and sail all the way to England and find this long-lost auntie, long-lost sister. And he dies. He dies of old age, illness. And the girl does it on her own, age 16, sailing around the world. And I did that because, against meeting people, I came across a friend of mine who had sailed all the way from Australia, all the way to England, in a 31-foot yacht with a chum of his. And they were both the wrong side of 65. And they've always wanted it all their lives, and they finally did it. And because of modern technology, they had a website, and they were updating this website every single day so you could see exactly where they were as they came across the ocean. And an amazing story unfolded. It was just such a wonderful story. I thought, well, you've got to write this. I'll tell you what it was. They were in the middle of the South Atlantic and emailing every day, doing their stuff. And I was reading it, and there's this fantastic story, which was this. They were sitting on their deck one night, and the stars were all out in the South Atlantic, and for a change it was calm. And one of them said, oh, look, 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 look. And they saw this light going across the eastern sky, quite low in the sky. And the other one said, oh, I know what that is, I know what that is. But I better go and check before I tell you my idea. I went down and emailed back to Australia, saying, look, we're in this latitude, this longitude, in this particular place. We'd just seen this light go across the eastern sky. What is it? And so these people looked it up back in Sydney or wherever headquarters were. They said, oh, yeah, they emailed back. Yes, that's the International Space Station. And the man said, yeah, I thought it was. Went back to his chum and said, that light over there, that's the International Space Station. And the other one says, oh, be nice to talk to them. True. Went downstairs, emailed back to headquarters in Sydney and said, look, we'd like to talk to those guys. And back in Sydney, they said, all right, we'll ask NASA. And they asked the space agency in America. We want to talk to those astronauts, these two old Australian gits out in the ocean, sipping their Guinness, want to talk to those. So NASA emailed or phoned the astronauts and said, would you mind having a talk with these people? And the true story is that 3, 4, 5 weeks afterwards, there was a conversation between the two astronauts going around in the spaceship and the two old blokes out in the ocean. And I think it kept them all going. You know, they're alone. They were these great adventurers, both of them in tin cans going around the Earth in different ways. And then the most marvelous thing happened. When these two arrived in Falmouth in Cornwall, finally, no big bands, no one, it wasn't a big thing or anything like that, it wasn't a race. They just arrived in the early morning in Falmouth, and they got off their boat, and they were just tying up with wobbly old legs and feeling a bit grim, and they looked up and this bloke was walking towards them down the quay. Lots of little kids coming after him, and it was the American astronaut who just landed and thought, well, I'm going to come and meet my friends who I've met by phone and by... I thought, what a story, I'm going to write that. So it became Alone on a Wide, Wide Sea. That's what I do. I take things that are true and real, and when it comes to adventures the world over, I use them.